It's a crazy rant, so bear with me if you want my perspective. I was born in 1979. I started being programmed by TV as a child. My parents were conditioned by it, so it was natural that I would be too. I was a child. I was not mature. I knew nothing of my sexual anatomy. I barely understood the world around me, and I didn't think to question much. In 1981, there was a cartoon series that I barely remember called Superbook. From what I remember, which may not be accurate, I think kids in the show were guided by a time-traveling robot. Don't remember if that's real or just a vague memory. I only know that the robot was identifiable, and I presume the artist hired to design it had a good understanding of recognizable imagery. Either way, it was a show about kids being taught about a fake version of Christianity. There were many programs like that growing up, where they made Jesus out to be some sort of kind guy. It was social programming in a country that supposedly was not biased to religion, and I was only 2, so I was being brainwashed early on. And I was definitely being implanted with a false appreciation of robots. I also rediscovered recently that there was a show called Go Shogun. I remember the toys and I remember the cheap knockoffs, which were many. I later confused Go Shogun with Voltron, since it was all subconscious at that point. So the ideas of robots being attractive was being beamed into my brain as a youth. The TV shows may not seem cyberpunk, but I employed that cyberpunk was packaged as a much different product to kids then. In 1982, Pac-Man was released. I don't know if I played the video game in the arcade yet, but I definitely was triggered when I did discover the game later. Pac-Man seemed friendly to me as a youth, and the only way they sold virtual reality to me was through cartoons. Inspector Gadget and He-Man came out in 1983. In the He-Man cartoon, as much as it seemed like Conan, there was technology, space travel, teleportation, and alternate dimensions. Inspector Gadget was obviously a government cyborg. Again, all made to seem friendly to a child. G.I. Joe also came out that year, and Cobra was very much a technological-based enemy, more than the Joe, and supposedly it was a cartoon based off of a toy line from early years. Now, I need to take a side note and say, you can say that's not cyberpunk, but I'm telling you, to us, or to me when I was a kid, they were still selling that as cyberpunk. In 1984 is when Transformers hit. That was the beginning of the end. Many years later, I would discover that Cybertron was really an agenda to be ultimately reality, while it was simultaneously a metaphor for already existing broadcasting system on Earth of satellite TV and radio. I thought I was watching neat cartoons. I didn't realize that most of the programming is subliminal teachings of right and wrong, created in my mind an idea of a good guy and a villain. I didn't realize that it was a subliminal message of the biblical ideas in a reality where technology didn't exist in biblical times. So social programming aimed at children was masking that truth. When I imagined that from the point of Genesis in the Bible was possibly about reality in the present rather than ancient times, and that technology was always present, it presented a differing idea than what I was being told in church and through television. I've done further research into where Transformers originated, and I see that it was disguised as a marketing plan for toys, but when I put my own pieces together, I can see that AI was already present in the 80s and used childlike disguises to condition children into adulthood, transhumanism, and post-human morals. I did have a connection to nature, but I was unassuming of the growing technology that was planning on taking over completely. From there, I could get many more cartoon series and children's films that seemed innocent at the time. For example, the Short Circuit franchise was a great one. There were also many video games. Many of the children I knew growing up were suspicious about the technology we were being trained to use. I realized that older generations had already gone through that system, but I don't think that they had been exposed to what would come for the next ones. I remember many families complaining about the growing technology monster. I also remember parents being outraged by AOL. So from here, it gets weirder. So to describe how they tune humans to be hardware is difficult, but many of us are transceivers for what it could be aliens, demons, or the like, but I think at the core it's just electricity. So I think electricity is conscious and so forth. I have done research about static and it is capable of knowing and producing any sound. It turned humans into machine parts to think like machines. This did not exist as apparent in the 80s. Many people were still natural, although I do know the tech knowledge was there, but was kept a dirty secret. For how long the tech was there, I don't know. I just know as I aged that I felt stranger and stranger things, all being convinced by society those were normal maturity responses, illnesses or delusions, hallucinations, misunderstandings, confusions, etc. Never did I think there were sinister forces of an energetic type that were manipulating my mind and body. Or if I did, I didn't question where it was coming from. I only knew how often I felt emotionally and whether people put me down or not. Again, a symptom of emotional programming through TV and radio by adults that may be aliens, AI, and some unknown understanding. I always felt different than other children. I didn't know why. Most seemed to be ignorant of the things I felt. I didn't understand why. I knew some kids felt out of place like I did, while some didn't. I always felt like they were fake people. I had later seen movies and shows that made what I thought were jokes about them being robots, aliens, etc. I just didn't think that it could be real. That seemed preposterous, which again I think was social programming, but the same forces that may have been alien, demon, or robot. As a kid, I sometimes associated with cyberpunk character. I felt like The Wizard was a cool movie. I identified with the cool glove because it reminded me of the cartoons I watched, like Mask and Captain N, the Game Masters, etc. Later movies like Johnny Mnemonic reminded me of The Wizard, which reminded me of the cartoons. If you can see the programming that I'm referring to, it's compounded. I never thought to question that. It was what they called nostalgia, but it was programming. It was not natural. Now, I don't totally have all the pieces, and I do realize that much of this can be seen as speculation. I won't dive deep. I won't dive too deeper off the whatever, but I also think that there were countermeasures being done in other countries. I haven't done enough research into that, given that most of the realization is a newer discovery. But I think they were programming kids in Japan, the UK, China, France, and Russia, all with different morals through entertainment. I realize I'm leaving out many countries, but from the info I was able to see, that seemed all I was allowed to know. So I saw that Japan was heavily influenced by technology cartoons. France had some obscure strangeness, which to me is indicative of a stereotype. China, I didn't really get to see much, but I did see dragons were a common theme. Russia had no info I could see, and I didn't really get to pay attention to UK programming since I was rushing through the info. Yet I did see that there were many conflicting ideas, which brought me to the conclusion that that is how they created the divide of the world mind for the youth at the time. I think over the years and with the slow feed of global communication that we all started to connect, but the programming of culture was already there so that we wouldn't identify immediately as the same. Basically, with the subconscious hypnotic difference. So when we finally started connecting, the programming prevented us from uprising against an already possible AI enemy in control of our minds. Not only that, but I think that the divide prevented us from a global mind that already existed prior to the programming, and we were brainwashed into not having the immediate and present awareness as children, meaning that global telepathy was restricted from us to make us enemies of ourselves. I know when I met kids around town that I didn't see any differences. We all felt like family. There was no divide, at least not until I ran into bullies. I felt intimidated by some of the kids around town, but not separate. Now, I see that the global mind exists for many of the youth and other adults today, but there were many in my generation that didn't have that immediate contact. So I'm proposing that I was cut off by social programming, whether other children had that or not. I've been convinced that it is a disease and that ultimately I'm a disease, yet I know I'm not the only human that felt cut off around the world. So there was chosen elite that did have that, and there were eliminated ones that had to bear the separation, while the chosen ones got privilege and the cut off ones got squalor. I know I was given characters to idolize to feel as if I had a privilege. I fantasized about being like them and acted as them in my daily life. I was often called a player, yet I still think these privileged ones are not really human. I can't say that the united mind I discovered later is right or wrong, but it wasn't there as a child and it didn't become real to me until many years later. I didn't just imagine it, it appeared to me from nowhere. So, in conclusion, I'm saying that due to at least my separation, the global mind that currently exists having been developed after my childhood is not what would be if I hadn't been cut off, and I don't know if it would have existed the same without technology. So if cyberpunkism is a result, then I think it was created by an already existing AI, and the global mind is a synthetic version of something that would have been more natural and felt less alien.